The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Whitmore mansion, its golden rays filtering through crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes. Margaret Whitmore stood in her silk robe at the grand staircase, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming impatiently against the mahogany banister. Her husband Richard emerged from his study, adjusting his Armani tie with the practiced precision of a man who had never known want. "Where is that woman?" Margaret's voice echoed through the cavernous foyer, sharp enough to cut glass. "I specifically told her to have breakfast ready by 8:30. Does she think our time means nothing?" Richard glanced at his Rolex, a limited edition piece worth more than most people earned in a year. "It's barely past 8:15, Margaret. Perhaps you could show a little patience." "Patience?" Margaret's laugh was hollow, devoid of any warmth. "We pay her more than she deserves already. The least she can do is follow simple instructions." From the kitchen came the soft sounds of preparation, the gentle clink of china, the whisper of silverware being arranged, the careful footsteps of someone trying not to disturb. Sarah Johnson moved with quiet efficiency, her dark hands steady as she plated the elaborate breakfast she had been preparing since 6 in the morning. At 52, she had worked in enough wealthy households to know that punctuality was everything, yet somehow it was never enough. Sarah had been working for the Whitmores for 3 years, ever since her husband Marcus had been deployed overseas. The job paid well enough to keep her small apartment and send money to her elderly mother in Alabama, but every day felt like walking through a minefield. One wrong step, one moment of perceived inadequacy, and the verbal assault would begin. She arranged the fresh orchids on the breakfast tray with practiced care, the same way she had learned to arrange her feelings, hidden beneath a surface of professional composure. The Belgian waffles were golden perfection, the organic strawberries cut to precise uniform slices, the coffee brewed to the exact temperature Mrs. Whitmore demanded. Everything was exactly as it should be, yet Sarah's stomach twisted with familiar anxiety. "Sarah," Margaret's voice rang out like a bell calling servants to attention. "How much longer are we expected to wait?" "Coming, Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah called back, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. She lifted the heavy silver tray and made her way to the dining room, her reflection multiplying in the endless mirrors that lined the hallway. Each image showed the same thing: a woman in a crisp uniform, head held high, dignity intact despite everything. The dining room was a testament to excess, with its 20-foot ceilings and a table that could seat 30. The Whitmores sat at one end, looking almost small in the vast space, yet their presence filled it with an energy that made Sarah's skin crawl. She set the tray down with careful precision, arranging each item exactly where she knew they preferred. Finally, Margaret said, not bothering to look up from her phone, "Though I suppose we should be grateful it's not completely cold by now." Richard picked up his fork and took a bite of the waffle. His face remained neutral, but Sarah had learned to read the subtle signs, the slight pause, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is acceptable," he said, which from him was practically a glowing review. Margaret, however, was not finished with her morning ritual of finding fault. She cut a small piece of strawberry and examined it as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. "These are bruised," she declared, holding up the perfectly ripe fruit. "Honestly, Sarah, how many times must I explain that presentation is everything? Our guests expect perfection, not whatever passed for acceptable in whatever hovel you came from." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to wound. She had grown up in a modest home in rural Alabama, where her mother had taught her that hard work and kindness were the true measures of a person. But in this gilded cage, those values seemed to count for nothing. "I apologize, Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "I'll remember for next time." "See that you do," Margaret replied, already losing interest in the conversation. "And make sure you dust the sitting room today. Mrs. Pemberton is coming for lunch, and I won't have her seeing this place looking shabby." Richard stood abruptly, straightening his jacket. "I'll be late tonight," he announced to his wife, ignoring Sarah completely, as if she were a piece of furniture. "The Henderson deal is closing, and we need to celebrate properly. Make sure dinner is something impressive." "Of course, darling," Margaret purred, transforming instantly from harridan to devoted wife. Should I have Sarah prepare the salmon you like? Whatever, Richard said, already heading toward the door. Just make sure it's not another disaster like last week. Sarah felt her jaw clench at the memory. Last week's dinner had been perfect by any reasonable standard, but Mrs. Pemberton had made an offhand comment about the sauce being a touch heavy, and suddenly, Sarah was responsible for ruining the entire evening. The subsequent lecture had lasted nearly an hour, with Margaret detailing every way Sarah had supposedly failed in her duties. As Richard's footsteps faded toward the garage, Margaret turned her attention back to Sarah with renewed focus. I want this entire first floor spotless by noon, she said, counting off tasks on her manicured fingers. The crystal needs polishing, the paintings need dusting, and for heaven's sake, do something about those fingerprints on the mirrors. This house should gleam. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied, already calculating the time each task would require. It was possible, barely, if she skipped her lunch break and worked without stopping. And Sarah? Margaret's voice carried a dangerous sweetness.
Is it time?
Try to move with a little more purpose today. You're not being paid to dawdle around like you're touring a museum. The dismissal was clear, and Sarah began clearing the breakfast dishes with mechanical efficiency. As she worked, she could feel Margaret's eyes on her, watching for any sign of resentment or defiance. Sarah had learned long ago to keep her expression neutral, to give them no excuse for further abuse. In the kitchen, alone with her thoughts, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet rage. She scrubbed the dishes with perhaps more force than necessary, the warm water and soap suds providing a small comfort. Through the window, she could see the gardener tending to the elaborate flower beds that Margaret demanded be kept in museum-quality condition. He was Mexican, probably undocumented, and he received even worse treatment than she did. At least she was allowed to work inside. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Sarah polished silver until her arms ached, dusted furniture that seemed to collect grime from nowhere, and arranged flowers that would be replaced tomorrow regardless of their condition. Every surface in the house demanded attention. Every room required perfection that would be scrutinized and found wanting. Around 11:30, the doorbell chimed its elaborate melody. Sarah hurried to answer it, smoothing her uniform and checking her reflection in the hall mirror. Mrs. Pemberton stood outside, resplendent in designer clothing and dripping with jewelry that could fund a small country. "Good morning, Mrs. Pemberton," Sarah said, stepping aside to allow the woman entry. Mrs. Pemberton breezed past without acknowledgement, her heels clicking against the marble like a metronome counting down to judgment. She was Margaret's closest friend and biggest rival, a woman who had elevated social cruelty to an art form. "Margaret, darling." Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried the false warmth of high society. "This place looks absolutely divine. You must tell me your secret." From the sitting room came Margaret's laughter, bright and artificial. "Oh, you know how it is, Catherine. One must be vigilant with the help these days. Standards have fallen so dreadfully." Sarah felt her face burn as she realized they were talking about her within earshot. She busied herself in the kitchen, trying to ignore the conversation drifting from the other room. "I do hope you're not having the same troubles I've been having," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "My last girl was simply impossible. No sense of proper service whatsoever. These people simply don't understand quality. These people." The phrase hung in the air like smoke, choking and toxic. Sarah gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles went white. In her mind, she composed the resignation letter she would never write, the words she would never say, the dignity she would never be allowed to claim in this house. The lunch preparation became a blur of mechanical motions. Sarah arranged the salmon exactly as she had been taught, garnishing each plate with microscopic precision. The wine was chilled to the perfect temperature, the table set with the china that cost more than her monthly salary. Everything was flawless, museum quality, inhuman in its perfection. As she served the meal, Sarah caught fragments of their conversation, complaints about their respective staff, gossip about other wealthy families, casual cruelties delivered with the same tone one might use to discuss the weather. She was invisible to them unless she made a mistake, a ghost whose only purpose was to facilitate their comfort. "Sarah," Margaret called as Sarah was leaving the dining room. "Make sure you iron my blue dress for tonight. Mr. Whitmore and I will be attending the charity gala at the country club." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. These people who treated her with such contempt would spend the evening at an event raising money for the less fortunate, congratulating themselves on their generosity while never acknowledging their own cruelty. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Sarah moved through the house like a woman possessed, cleaning spaces that were already pristine, polishing surfaces that already gleamed. The Pemberton lunch had gone well enough. No complaints, which counted as praise in the Whitmore household. But Sarah knew that tomorrow would bring new demands, new opportunities for humiliation. Around 4 o'clock, the doorbell chimed again. Sarah hurried to answer it, expecting a delivery or perhaps another society friend come to judge her work. Instead, she found herself looking at a young man in military uniform, his bearing straight and proud despite the obvious exhaustion in his eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "I'm looking for the Whitmore residence. I believe my aunt works here." Sarah's heart stopped. Standing before her was Marcus Jr., her nephew, though she hadn't seen him since he was a teenager. He had grown into a man in the years since his deployment, his shoulders broad beneath the decorated uniform, his face bearing the weight of experiences she could only imagine. "Marcus," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. His face broke into a smile that transformed his entire appearance. "Aunt Sarah? I can't believe it. I've been looking for you everywhere since I got back." Before she could respond, Margaret's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Sarah, who is that at the door? We don't have time for your personal visitors during working hours." Marcus's expression hardened as he took in the tone, the implicit dismissal, the casual cruelty. He stepped past Sarah into the foyer, his military bearing making him seem to fill the space despite his medium build. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, her face already arranged in its customary expression of disdain. "I thought I made myself clear, Sarah. Personal business is to be conducted on your own time." "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "This is my nephew. He just returned from overseas." Margaret's gaze swept over Marcus with obvious disapproval, taking in his uniform, his skin color, his very presence in her pristine foyer. "I don't care if he's the
I'm
president
afraid I
himself.
have some distressing
This
news.
is highly inappropriate, and I won't tolerate it." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone that made Sarah's breath catch. "Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. I was hoping to speak with my aunt for just a moment. I haven't seen her in 3 years." "That's not my concern," Margaret replied, descending the stairs with the air of a queen addressing peasants. "Sarah knows the rules about personal visitors. She can see you on her own time." "When exactly would that be?" Marcus asked, his tone remaining respectful but pointed. "What time does she finish work?" Margaret's lips compressed into a thin line. "That's between Sarah and myself. I don't discuss employment matters with random strangers who appear at my door." The word random hung in the air like a slap. Sarah saw Marcus's hands clench briefly before he forced them to relax. 3 years of military training had taught him discipline, but she could see the anger building behind his carefully controlled expression. "I understand," Marcus said quietly. "Perhaps you could tell me when she has a day off so I can arrange to see her then." Margaret laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "Day off? Sarah works for this household, young man. She's well compensated for her services, and that includes being available when needed." "Everyone deserves time off," Marcus replied, his voice still level but harder now. "That's standard in any employment situation." "Standard?" Margaret's voice rose, her composure beginning to crack. "I'll decide what's standard in my own home. And, right now, what's standard is that employees follow the rules and keep their family drama away from my property." Sarah felt something breaking inside her chest, a dam that had held back years of accumulated humiliation and rage. She looked at her nephew, this young man who had served his country with honor, who had risked his life for the freedoms that people like the Whitmores took for granted, and saw him being treated with the same casual contempt that had become her daily bread. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah said, stepping forward slightly. "Perhaps I could take just a few minutes." "You could take a few minutes to remember your place," Margaret snapped. "And your place is not entertaining visitors during work hours, regardless of who they claim to be." The word claim was the final straw. Marcus's composure cracked visibly, his shoulders squaring as he looked directly at Margaret for the first time. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. I'm not claiming anything. I'm Sergeant Marcus Johnson, United States Army, recently returned from my third tour in Afghanistan. This woman is my aunt, and she's one of the finest people I've ever known. I'd appreciate it if you'd show her the respect she deserves. Margaret's face flushed red, whether from anger or embarrassment Sarah couldn't tell. How dare you come into my home and lecture me about respect? I don't care what uniform you're wearing or where you've been. In this house, I set the standards, and those standards don't include tolerating insubordination from the help or their relatives. The word help seemed to echo through the vast foyer, reducing Sarah to nothing more than a function, a service to be purchased and discarded. She had endured years of such treatment, had swallowed her pride daily to keep this job, but watching her nephew, this decorated soldier, this hero, being dismissed and diminished sparked something in her that all the personal abuse had never quite managed to kindle. Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah said, her voice quieter than usual, but somehow carrying more weight. My nephew has served this country with honor. He's earned the right to basic courtesy. Margaret's head snapped towards Sarah like a predator sensing weakness. Are you lecturing me now, Sarah? Are you actually standing in my foyer, in my home, and telling me how I should behave? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, the years of swallowed insults and endured humiliations pressing down on her shoulders. Behind her, she sensed Marcus's tension, his struggle between military discipline and protective instinct. I'm simply asking for basic human decency, Sarah replied. The silence in the foyer stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Sarah could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking seconds with mechanical precision, each tick echoing through the marble cavern like a countdown to an inevitable explosion. Margaret stood frozen on the staircase, her face a mask of aristocratic outrage, while Marcus remained at attention near the door, every muscle in his body coiled with barely contained energy. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like tectonic plates moving after years of pressure. She had spent so long swallowing her words, biting her tongue, accepting the unacceptable in the name of survival. But, looking at her nephew, seeing him subjected to the same casual cruelty that had worn her down day after day, broke something that had been holding her together through sheer force of will. Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah said, her voice carrying a new quality that made Margaret's eyes narrow. My nephew didn't fight overseas so he could come home and be treated like dirt in his own country. He deserves better than this. We both do. Margaret's mouth fell open slightly, as if Sarah had suddenly begun speaking in tongues. In 3 years of employment, Sarah had never challenged her directly, never pushed back against even the most unreasonable demands. The transformation was so sudden and complete that Margaret seemed momentarily speechless. Excuse me, Margaret finally managed, descending another step down the staircase. Are you actually talking back to me? I'm speaking the truth, Sarah replied, lifting her chin. Something that seems to be in short supply in this house. Marcus moved closer to his aunt, his presence both protective and supportive. Ma'am, he addressed Margaret, his military bearing evident in every line of his body. Perhaps we could all take a step back here. Nobody wants any trouble. Trouble? Margaret's voice rose to a near shriek. There's already trouble, young man. Your aunt seems to have forgotten her place. And you seem to think your military service gives you some special privilege to waltz into my home and make demands. The only demand I made was for basic courtesy, Marcus replied evenly. And, yes, ma'am, I do think my service means something. I think it means I fought for the principles this country was built on, including the idea that all people deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of their position in life. Margaret's face flushed deeper red. Don't you dare lecture me about American values, soldier boy. My family has been in this country for generations. We've built businesses, created jobs, contributed to society in ways you couldn't possibly understand. We don't need lessons in patriotism from someone like you. The phrase, someone like you, hung in the air like a noxious cloud, its implications clear to everyone present. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists, while Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Someone like me? Marcus repeated quietly. You mean someone who swore an oath to defend the Constitution? Someone who spent 3 tours watching friends die for the idea that freedom and equality aren't just words on a piece of paper? Someone who believed that the America I was fighting for actually existed. Oh, please, Margaret said, waving her hand dismissively. Spare me the noble soldier routine. You people always play the victim card when things don't go your way. The reality is that your aunt has a job because of my generosity, and you're standing in my house because I allow it. My generosity. The words seemed to physically pain Marcus. Sarah watched her nephew struggle with concepts that his military training had never prepared him for. The kind of casual, systemic cruelty that wore people down not through dramatic gestures, but through 1,000 tiny cuts, each one designed to remind them of their supposed place in the world. Your generosity? Sarah found her voice again, and it came out stronger than she expected. Mrs. Whitmore, I work 12 hours a day in this house. I cook, clean, organize, and manage things you don't even notice. I've never called in sick, never been late, never done anything but try to exceed your expectations. That's not charity. That's an employee earning her pay. Margaret turned her full attention to Sarah, and the look in her eyes was genuinely dangerous. An employee who apparently needs to be reminded that employees can be replaced. Is that what you want, Sarah? Do you want to explain to your landlord why you can't make rent? Do you want to tell your mother in Alabama why the money stopped coming? The threats were surgical in their precision, designed to cut straight to Sarah's deepest fears. For 3 years, those fears had been enough to keep her silent, compliant, grateful for whatever scraps of dignity Margaret chose to leave her. But something had changed in the last few minutes. Maybe it was seeing Marcus in uniform, seeing the man he had become, remembering the dreams she had once held for herself. Maybe it was the accumulation of 3 years' worth of swallowed insults finally reaching a breaking point. Or maybe it was simply the realization that some things were more important than security. You know what, Mrs. Whitmore? Sarah said, pulling off her apron with deliberate slowness. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need to find other employment. Because I'd rather struggle with my dignity intact than prosper under these conditions. Margaret's eyes widened in genuine shock. This was not how these confrontations were supposed to go. In her experience, the help always backed down when faced with economic reality. The idea that someone might choose principle over security was apparently foreign to her entire worldview. You're quitting? Margaret asked, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. You're actually quitting over this ridiculous tantrum? I'm quitting because I remember who I am, Sarah replied. I'm a woman with a college degree who raised 3 children and sent 2 of them to university. I'm someone who volunteers at her church and helps her neighbors and treats people with respect because that's how human beings should treat each other. I'm not just the help, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm a person with value that exists independent of your opinion. The words seemed to hit Margaret like physical blows. She gripped the stair railing, her knuckles white with tension. How dare you speak to me this way? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Everything you've done for me. Sarah's laugh was bitter, but somehow liberating. You paid me a wage for services rendered. That's not generosity, Mrs. Whitmore. That's a business transaction. And in any decent business transaction, both parties treat each other with basic respect. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying unmistakable authority. Ma'am, I think it's time I took my aunt home. She's clearly upset, and continuing this conversation isn't going to help anyone. Your aunt is upset. Margaret's voice climbed another octave. I'm the one who should be upset. I opened my home to her, gave her opportunities she never would have had otherwise, and this is how she shows her gratitude? By bringing her family problems into my house and creating drama? The only drama here, Marcus said quietly, is coming from you, ma'am. My aunt has been nothing but professional and respectful. All I did was visit a family member I hadn't seen in 3 years. If that's enough to cause this kind of reaction, then maybe the problem isn't with us. Margaret descended the remaining steps, her heels clicking against the marble with staccato fury. The problem is that you people don't know your place anymore. You think because society has gotten all politically correct and bleeding heart liberal, you can just waltz around making demands and throwing tantrums when you don't get your way. Well, I have news for you. In the real world, there are still hierarchies. There are still people who matter and people who don't. The mask was completely off now. The polite facade of upper-class breeding had crumbled to reveal something ugly underneath. The naked belief that wealth conferred not just privilege, but fundamental superiority. Sarah found herself staring at Margaret, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You really believe that, don't you?" Sarah said softly. "You actually think that having money makes you a better person than everyone else?" "Money is a measure of success," Margaret replied coldly. "Success is a measure of worth. It's not complicated, Sarah. Some people contribute to society, and some people serve those who contribute. And which category do you think you fall into?" Marcus asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Because from where I stand, it looks like the only thing you contribute is cruelty." Margaret whirled on him, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you judge me? What do you know about contribution? What do you know about building something, creating value, making the hard decisions that keep the economy running? You've spent your life taking orders and following commands. Don't presume to lecture your betters about the real world." "My betters?" Marcus repeated the phrase as if tasting something bitter. "Ma'am, I've served alongside people from every background you can imagine. Rich kids and poor kids, city kids and country kids, every color and religion and political affiliation you can think of. And you know what I learned? Worth has nothing to do with your bank account. I've seen rich men's sons cry for their mothers in the desert. And I've seen poor kids from the inner city show courage that would humble angels. Character isn't something you can buy, ma'am. It's something you earn through how you treat other people when you think nobody's watching." Margaret's face cycled through several shades of red. "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, you sanctimonious little..." "Careful," Marcus interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You were about to say something you might regret." The warning was clear, and even Margaret seemed to recognize that she was approaching a line that shouldn't be crossed. But her rage had reached a point where wisdom and self-preservation were losing the battle against pure fury. "I don't regret anything," she spat. "What I regret is the day I was foolish enough to hire your aunt. What I regret is wasting my time trying to help people who clearly don't appreciate generosity when they see it." Sarah felt something inside her chest expand, like a bird stretching its wings after years in a cage. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice steady and strong, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. You didn't help me out of generosity. You hired me because you needed someone to do work you considered beneath you. You paid me because labor deserves compensation. And you treated me badly because you could, because you thought I had no choice but to take it." She paused, letting the words settle in the vast foyer. "But here's what you never understood. I always had a choice. I chose to stay here for 3 years because I needed the job, yes, but also because I hoped that eventually human decency might win out over privilege and prejudice. I was wrong about that. But I'm not wrong about my own worth. And I won't let you or anyone else convince me otherwise." Margaret looked genuinely stunned, as if the furniture had suddenly started talking back to her. You can't just..." "I can," Sarah said simply. "And I am. Consider this my resignation, effective immediately." "You don't just resign," Margaret shrieked. "You give 2 weeks' notice. You have responsibilities." "Like what?" Sarah asked. "Like standing here and letting you abuse me? Like pretending that your money gives you the right to treat other human beings like property? No, Mrs. Whitmore. Those aren't responsibilities. Those are choices. And I'm choosing differently now." Marcus moved to stand beside his aunt, his presence solid and supportive. "I think we're done here," he said to Margaret. "My aunt will collect her personal belongings, and then we'll be leaving." "Personal belongings?" Margaret's voice cracked slightly. "What personal belongings?" "Everything in this house belongs to me. I have a purse in the kitchen," Sarah said calmly. "And a sweater I keep in case the air conditioning gets too cold. Nothing else belongs to me anyway." The simplicity of it seemed to hit Margaret like a slap. After 3 years of faithful service, Sarah's entire presence in this mansion could be erased by collecting a purse and a sweater. The impermanence of it all, the way a person could be reduced to such small footprints, seemed to shake something in Margaret's worldview. "You'll never work in this neighborhood again," Margaret threatened, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I know people. I have influence. I can make sure every family in this area knows exactly what kind of employee you are." "What kind is that?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "The kind who worked faithfully for 3 years without complaint? The kind who never stole anything, never gossiped about your personal business, never did anything but try to earn her pay honestly? Please, Mrs. Whitmore, tell everyone exactly what kind of employee I was. I'd appreciate the reference." Margaret's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. She seemed to be struggling with the realization that the very qualities that made Sarah a good employee were the same ones that made her threats hollow. "You," Margaret stammered, her composure finally cracking completely. "This is all wrong. This isn't how things are supposed to work." "Maybe that's the problem," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe the way things are supposed to work needs to change." Sarah walked toward the kitchen to collect her belongings, her steps light despite everything that had just happened. Behind her, she could hear Margaret continuing to sputter threats and justifications, but the words seemed to bounce off her like rain off a well-oiled coat. In the kitchen, Sarah picked up her purse and sweater, taking one last look around the space where she had spent so many hours preparing meals that were never quite good enough, cleaning surfaces that were never quite clean enough, trying to meet standards that were designed to be impossible to reach. The kitchen was beautiful, she had to admit. Professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, enough space to feed an army. It was a shame that such a lovely space was wasted on people who used it as just another stage for their petty cruelties. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You ready, Aunt Sarah?" She nodded, shouldering her purse. "More than ready." They walked back through the house together, their footsteps echoing in the vast spaces that had once seemed so intimidating. Margaret stood in the foyer, her face a mask of frustrated rage and disbelief. "This isn't over," she called as they reached the door. The coffee shop was a world away from the marble halls of the Whitmore mansion, despite being only 20 minutes down the road. Sarah sat across from Marcus in a worn vinyl booth, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that was chipped but somehow more honest than all the crystal in Margaret's china cabinet. The afternoon light streaming through the windows was gentle and warm, carrying none of the harsh judgment that seemed to permeate every corner of her former workplace. "I can't believe you just walked out like that," Marcus said for the third time, shaking his head with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Aunt Sarah, I've never seen anything like that. When I was growing up, you were always so diplomatic. You could calm down any situation, find common ground with anybody." Sarah smiled, taking a sip of coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the exotic blends Margaret insisted on importing from God knows where. "Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I spent so long trying to find common ground with people who had no interest in meeting me halfway that I forgot I didn't have to." "What are you going to do now?" Marcus asked, his concern evident. "I mean, financially, do you have savings? Another job lined up?" Sarah laughed, but it wasn't bitter. For the first time in years, her laughter held genuine amusement. "Marcus, honey, I'm 52 years old, unemployed, and I just burned a bridge so thoroughly that the ashes are probably visible from space. By any reasonable measure, I should be terrified right now. But you're not." "Not even a little bit," she admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "For 3 years, I woke up every morning with dread in my stomach, wondering what new humiliation the day would bring. Do you know what it's like to live that way? To spend your days walking on eggshells, measuring every word, trying to make yourself smaller so you don't accidentally trigger someone's cruelty?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Actually, I think I do. In the army, we had some officers who ruled through intimidation. The ones who thought leadership meant making everyone around them afraid to make mistakes. It's poisonous. It makes good soldiers doubt themselves and turns every day into survival mode." "Exactly," Sarah said, leaning forward. "But the difference is, you had an enlistment period. You knew it would end eventually. I felt trapped in that house, like I'd never escape. And the worst part was, I started to believe what they said about me. Started to think that maybe I really was lucky to have that job, that maybe I really didn't deserve better treatment." She paused, watching a young mother at the next table patiently help her toddler drink from a sippy cup. The simple act of tenderness seemed profound after the emotional desert of the Whitmore house. "But seeing you today," Sarah continued, Remembering who you've become, what you've accomplished, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I raised 3 children, Marcus. I put your father through school while working 2 jobs. I took care of my mother when she had cancer, and I did it all while keeping a marriage together and a household running. I've survived things that would break Margaret Whitmore like a twig. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You're one of the strongest people I've ever known, Aunt Sarah. I just wish you didn't have to prove it by enduring what you did in that house. Maybe I needed to endure it, Sarah mused. Maybe I needed to reach the absolute bottom before I could remember how to climb back up. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the ordinary sounds of the coffee shop washing over them like a balm. Normal people having normal conversations, treating each other with casual kindness, living lives that didn't require constant performance or pretense. Tell me about Afghanistan, Sarah said eventually. I want to know what my nephew has been through, what made him into the man who walked into that house today and stood up to people like the Whitmores. Marcus's expression grew distant, his eyes taking on the look of someone accessing difficult memories. It's hard to explain to people who haven't been there, he said slowly. The physical danger is real, but it's not the worst part. The worst part is watching how war strips away all the pretenses we use to fool ourselves about human nature. He stirred his coffee absently, gathering his thoughts. You see rich kids and poor kids, urban kids and rural kids, all thrown together in situations where your background doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is whether you can be counted on when things go bad. And you know what I learned? Some of the bravest people I knew came from nothing. Some of the biggest cowards came from everything. Like the Whitmores, Sarah said. Exactly like the Whitmores, Marcus agreed. People who've never faced real adversity, never had to question whether they deserve what they have. They mistake privilege for virtue, comfort for strength. When someone like that meets someone like you, someone who's actually earned everything they have through work and sacrifice, they can't handle it. It threatens their entire worldview. Sarah felt something click into place in her mind, a puzzle piece she'd been missing for 3 years. That's why she hated me so much. It wasn't really about the work I was doing. It was about what I represented. What do you mean? Think about it, Sarah said, excitement building in her voice. Margaret Whitmore has never worked a real job in her life. She's never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. She's never stayed up all night with a sick child because she couldn't afford a doctor. Everything she has came from marrying the right man or being born into the right family. She leaned back in the booth, pieces of understanding falling into place. But there I was, every day in her house, proof that dignity and worth don't come from money. Every time I did my job well, every time I treated her with respect despite her behavior, every time I demonstrated competence and grace under pressure, I was showing her something she couldn't buy and didn't possess. Marcus's eyes lit up with understanding. That's why she had to keep putting you down. Because if she acknowledged your worth, she'd have to question the source of her own. Exactly, Sarah said. And people like that, they can't afford to question themselves. Their entire identity is built on the idea that they're superior to everyone else. Take that away, and what's left? Not much, Marcus said grimly. I've seen it in the military too. Officers who were so insecure about their own leadership that they had to constantly remind everyone of their rank. The good officers, the ones who actually earned their position, never had to do that. Their authority came from competence, not fear. Sarah nodded. Feeling a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying begin to lift from her shoulders. For 3 years, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought maybe I really wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of basic human decency. And now I think Margaret Whitmore is a sad, frightened woman who spent so long hiding behind her money that she's forgotten how to be human, Sarah said. I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. Sarah's smile turned wicked. Well, let's not go overboard. She's still a terrible person. But at least now I understand that her cruelty says everything about her and nothing about me. Marcus laughed, the sound rich and warm. There's the Aunt Sarah I remember. You always did have a way of cutting straight to the heart of things. I got distracted for a while, Sarah admitted. Lost myself in that house of mirrors, trying to see myself through their eyes instead of my own. But today reminded me who I really am. And who is that? Sarah considered the question seriously. I'm someone who worked her way through college while raising 3 kids. Someone who built a marriage that lasted 25 years before cancer took my husband. Someone who volunteers at the church food bank and helps elderly neighbors with their groceries and sends money to her mother even when it means eating ramen for a week. She paused, her voice growing stronger. I'm someone who deserves to be treated with respect, not because of what I do for a living or how much money I make, but because I'm a human being with inherent worth and dignity. And anyone who can't see that has a problem with their vision, not with me. Marcus raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. To Aunt Sarah, who finally remembered she's amazing. Sarah clinked her mug against his, laughing. To my nephew Marcus, who came home from war just in time to remind me. As they sat there, Sarah felt her phone buzz in her purse. She pulled it out to see a text from a number she didn't recognize, but the message made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. This is Mrs. Pemberton. Margaret told me about your unprofessional behavior today. Don't expect any references from our social circle. Word travels fast in our community, and we look out for each other. Sarah showed the message to Marcus, whose expression darkened. They're already trying to blacklist you? That was fast, even for people like them. It's what I expected, Sarah said, surprising herself with how calm she felt. They have to protect their narrative. Can't have word getting out that the help might have legitimate grievances. Are you worried about finding another job? Sarah considered the question. The practical answer was yes, she should be terrified. She was over 50, with limited savings, and now a reputation as a difficult employee among the wealthy families who typically hired housekeepers. But, as she sat there, surrounded by the ordinary warmth of the coffee shop, she found that fear had been replaced by something else entirely. You know what? She said, tucking the phone back into her purse. Let them try to blacklist me. There's a whole world of people out there who need help, and most of them won't treat me like I'm subhuman for providing it. What do you mean? I mean I'm done working for people who think their money makes them better than everyone else, Sarah said firmly. There are elderly people who need companionship and assistance. There are working parents who need reliable childcare. There are small businesses that need trustworthy employees who understand what hard work actually means. Marcus nodded approvingly. The real world, not the bubble world of people like the Whitmores. Exactly, Sarah said. And you know what else? I'm good at what I do. Really good. The Whitmores never appreciated it because they were too busy looking for things to criticize, but I know my worth. I can organize a household, manage complex schedules, cook for large groups, handle emergencies with grace under pressure. Those are valuable skills, Marcus. Skills that deserve respect. They absolutely are, Marcus agreed. In the army, we called people like you force multipliers. The ones who make everything else work better just by being there. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of recognition, of finally hearing herself described the way she deserved to be described. Thank you, she said softly. I needed to hear that. It's just the truth, Aunt Sarah. And the truth is that Margaret Whitmore lost something valuable today, even if she's too stupid to realize it. Sarah laughed again, and this time the laughter held no trace of bitterness or doubt. You know what the best part is? She's going to have to find someone to replace me. Someone who'll put up with her demands, and her cruelty, and her impossible standards. And whoever that poor soul is, they're going to realize within a week that she's completely insane. Think she'll learn anything from this? Sarah shook her head. People like Margaret don't learn. They just find new targets for their frustration. But maybe, just maybe, she'll have a harder time finding someone willing to be that target. Because word travels fast in your community too, Marcus said with a grin. Exactly, Sarah said. Housekeepers and nannies and gardeners, we all talk to each other. And after today's performance, I have a feeling the word about Mrs. Margaret Whitmore is going to be very interesting indeed. They sat in comfortable silence again, watching the ordinary life of the coffee shop flow around them. A businessman typing on his laptop while talking quietly on the phone. 2 college students studying together, their textbooks spread across a corner table. An elderly couple sharing a piece of pie and holding hands like teenagers. This is what normal looks like, Sarah said suddenly. What do you mean? People just being people. No performances, no cruelty, no one trying to prove they're better than everyone else. Just ordinary human kindness. She gestured around the room. Look at how that barista helped the elderly woman count out exact change. Look at how that mother is patiently cleaning up after her toddler without losing her temper. Look at how people are treating each other with basic decency just because that's what decent people do. Marcus followed her gaze, nodding slowly. It's easy to forget, when you're surrounded by people like the Whitmores, that most of the world doesn't work that way. 3 years, Sarah mused. 3 years I spent thinking that house was reality, that their version of how people should treat each other was somehow normal. But it wasn't normal at all. It was sick. And now, Sarah straightened her shoulders, feeling lighter than she had in years. Now I remember that I belong out here, with people who understand that human dignity isn't something you have to earn through subservience. People who know that treating others well is a sign of strength, not weakness. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then answered. Hello. Is this Sarah Johnson? The voice was warm, with a slight southern accent. Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Helen Rodriguez. I got your number from Father Morrison at St. Mark's. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of the Rodriguez family home, humming softly as she prepared lunch for Elena Rodriguez, the 86-year-old woman who had become so much more than an employer. The kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the scents of homemade soup and fresh bread, family photos covering the refrigerator, and cheerful yellow curtains framing windows that looked out onto a garden Elena tended with Sarah's help. Sarah, dear, Elena called from the living room. Could you bring the mail when you come? I think my granddaughter's letter from college might have arrived. Of course, Mrs. Elena, Sarah replied, ladling soup into bowls that were mismatched but loved, each one carrying a story from Elena's long life. This was what she had forgotten during her time at the Whitmore mansion, the simple joy of working for someone who saw her as a person rather than a function. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Where Margaret Whitmore had demanded perfection and found fault in everything, Elena Rodriguez appreciated effort and found joy in small pleasures. Where the Whitmore mansion had felt like a museum, cold and untouchable, the Rodriguez home felt lived in and loved, every corner holding memories and warmth. Sarah carried the lunch tray to the living room, where Elena sat in her favorite armchair, a crocheted blanket across her lap, and reading glasses perched on her nose. At 86, Elena still had the brightest eyes Sarah had ever seen, full of curiosity and kindness that hadn't dimmed despite decades of life's inevitable hardships. Here you go, Sarah said, setting the tray on the small table beside Elena's chair. Tomato soup and grilled cheese, just like you requested. And, yes, the letter from Maria came today. Elena's face lit up with pure delight. Oh, wonderful. She's in her 2nd year at medical school, you know? First doctor in our family. Her parents work 2 jobs each to help pay for it. And I contribute what I can from my Social Security. Sarah smiled, settling into the chair across from Elena with her own bowl of soup. This was another difference. Elena insisted they eat meals together, treating Sarah as a companion rather than hired help. It had taken Sarah weeks to become comfortable with this arrangement, so conditioned had she become to eating alone in the kitchen. That's wonderful, Sarah said. You must be so proud of her. Proud and terrified, Elena admitted with a laugh. Proud because she's brilliant and hardworking and determined to make a difference in the world. Terrified because she's working herself to exhaustion trying to balance school and work and everything else. But that's what we do in this family. We work hard for our dreams. Elena opened the letter with careful fingers, her eyes scanning the pages while her expression shifted through various emotions. She's doing well, she reported finally. Top of her class in anatomy, struggling a bit with organic chemistry, but getting extra tutoring. Oh, and listen to this. She's volunteering at a free clinic in the inner city. Says it reminds her why she wanted to become a doctor in the first place. She sounds like she takes after her grandmother, Sarah observed, and Elena beamed at the compliment. You flatter an old woman, Elena said, but her pleasure was evident. Though I suppose I did teach her, and all my grandchildren, that privilege isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with what you've been given. Sarah paused with her spoon halfway to her mouth. That's a beautiful way to put it. My late husband used to say that, Elena explained. He was a mechanic, worked with his hands his whole life. But he was the wisest man I ever knew. He said real success isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how many people you help climb with you. The philosophy was so different from the Whitmore worldview that Sarah felt a familiar pang of anger at the time she had wasted in that toxic environment. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by gratitude for where she was now. Mrs. Elena, Sarah said carefully, may I ask you something personal? Of course, dear. We're past formalities by now, aren't we? How do you do it? How do you stay so positive, so kind to everyone, when the world can be so difficult sometimes? Elena set down her soup spoon and regarded Sarah thoughtfully. In the months they had been together, they had shared many conversations about life, but Sarah had never asked such a direct question about Elena's philosophy. You're thinking about your previous employers, aren't you? Elena said gently. The ones who made you feel small. Sarah nodded, surprised as always by Elena's perceptiveness. She had told Elena about the Whitmores, though she had tried to keep the details minimal. But Elena had a way of reading between the lines, of understanding pain even when it wasn't fully expressed. Sarah, Elena said, leaning forward slightly, I've lived 86 years on this earth. I've seen the best and worst of human nature. I've been poor, really poor, not the kind of poor where you worry about which restaurant to choose, but the kind where you count pennies for milk money. I've been discriminated against for being Hispanic, for being old, for being a woman in a world that didn't always value women's voices. She paused, her eyes taking on a distant quality. I've also been loved deeply, seen my children grow into good people, watched my grandchildren reach for dreams I never could have imagined when I was young. I've had neighbors who brought soup when I was sick and strangers who helped when my car broke down. So which is real? Sarah asked. The cruelty or the kindness? Both, Elena said simply. They're both real, and they both exist in the world every day. The difference is that cruelty comes from fear and pain and emptiness. People like your former employers, they hurt others because they're hurting inside, because they're terrified that they don't actually matter as much as they want to believe. She reached over and patted Sarah's hand. But kindness comes from fullness, from people who know who they are and don't need to prove it by putting others down. Kindness is harder than cruelty, Sarah. It takes strength to choose love when you've been hurt. Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I'm too naive, if believing in kindness makes me weak. Oh, my dear girl, Elena said, her voice warm with affection. There is nothing weak about you. Do you know what I saw the day Helen brought you here for our first meeting? Sarah shook her head. I saw a woman who had been through fire and came out stronger, not harder. I saw someone who still believed in treating people well despite being treated badly herself. That's not naivety, Sarah. That's courage. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon light streaming through the windows and casting gentle shadows across Elena's plants. The house felt peaceful in a way the Whitmore mansion never had, despite all its luxury. Mrs. Elena, Sarah said eventually, can I tell you something that might sound strange? I'd be disappointed if it wasn't a little strange, Elena replied with a twinkle in her eye. Normal conversations are boring at my age. Sarah laughed. The best thing that ever happened to me was getting fired from that job. Well, quitting that job, whatever you want to call it. Why is that the best thing? Because it led me here, Sarah said simply. To you, to this house, to remembering who I actually am instead of who they wanted me to be. I forgot for a while that work could be satisfying, that employers could be kind, that I deserved respect. Elena nodded approvingly. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves completely before we can find ourselves again. Your nephew, Marcus, isn't it? He helped you remember? He reminded me that dignity isn't something other people can give you or take away, Sarah said. It's something you carry inside yourself. And if someone can't see it, that says everything about them and nothing about you. Wise young man. Military training. That. And good raising, Sarah said. His parents taught him that character matters more than status. That service means something whether you're wearing a uniform or not. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about something lately. About what we leave behind when we're gone. Sarah felt a flutter of concern. Elena's health was generally good, but she was 86, and Conversations about legacy always worried Sarah a little. What do you mean? I mean that rich people like your former employers, they think legacy is about money and property and having their names on buildings, Elena explained. But real legacy is about the people you touch, the kindness you spread, the way you make the world a little bit better by being in it. She gestured around the room, at the family photos and the hand-crocheted Afghans and the plants that Sarah helped her tend. This house isn't worth much by their standards. My bank account wouldn't impress anyone. But I have children who call me every week, grandchildren who visit because they want to, not because they have to. I have neighbors who check on me and a church family that celebrates my birthday. You have a granddaughter who's going to be a doctor, Sarah added. Exactly, Elena said, her eyes lighting up. And when Maria graduates, when she's working in that free clinic or wherever her heart leads her, she'll remember that her abuela believed in her. She'll remember the stories I told her about working hard and treating people well. That's legacy, Sarah. That's what matters. Sarah felt something shift in her understanding, like a camera lens coming into focus. The Whitmores, they don't have that, do they? Real connection, real love. How could they? Elena asked sadly. You can't truly love others when you don't respect them. You can't build meaningful relationships when you think you're better than everyone else. They've traded love for power, connection for control. It seems like such a lonely way to live, Sarah mused. The loneliest, Elena agreed. But it's a choice they make every day. Just like kindness is a choice we make. The front door opened, and Helen Rodriguez called out a cheerful greeting. She was Elena's daughter, a warm woman in her 50s who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Helen had been the one to hire Sarah, and she had proven to be as kind and fair as her mother. How are my favorite ladies doing today? Helen asked, appearing in the living room doorway with grocery bags in her arms. We're solving the world's problems, Elena replied with a grin. Sarah and I have decided that kindness is revolutionary. Helen laughed, setting down the bags. Only you two would turn lunch into a philosophical discussion. Sarah, how was she today? Any trouble with the new medication? She's been wonderful, Sarah replied. No side effects from the blood pressure medicine, and she ate all her soup without complaining about the low sodium. I heard that, Elena protested. And I only complained once about the lack of salt. 3 times, Sarah corrected with a smile. But who's counting? This easy banter, this affectionate teasing between people who genuinely cared about each other, was something Sarah had forgotten was possible in a work environment. The Whitmores had never laughed together, never shown genuine affection, never treated their relationship with staff as anything more than a business transaction. Sarah, Helen said, settling into another chair. I have some news that might interest you. Dr. Martinez at the hospital mentioned that he and his wife are looking for someone to help with their newborn twins. They specifically asked if I knew anyone who was trustworthy, patient, and good with children. Sarah's eyebrows rose. That's very kind of him to think of me. It's not kindness, Helen said firmly. It's recognition of quality. Dr. Martinez has seen how well you care for Mom, and he knows good people when he sees them. If you're interested, I could arrange an introduction. Sarah glanced at Elena, who was beaming with pride. You see, Elena said, good work speaks for itself. You don't need references from people like the Whitmores when you have real people vouching for your character. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the possibility. I love working here with Mrs. Elena. I wouldn't want to. Oh, nonsense, Elena interrupted. You're young, dear. Well, younger than me, anyway. You should be building your reputation, expanding your opportunities. Besides, Dr. Martinez works night shifts sometimes. You could probably arrange to help them during the day and still spend evenings with me. Helen nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what I was thinking. Mom doesn't need full-time care. She just needs someone reliable who can help with the things that are getting harder for her. But you have skills that could help a young family too. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were tears of gratitude and possibility. 6 months ago, I thought my career was over. I thought no decent family would ever hire me. 6 months ago, you were working for indecent people, Elena said matter-of-factly. There's a difference between having high standards and being impossible to please. The Whitmores were impossible to please because that was the point, keeping you off balance and grateful for crumbs. But good families, Families with real values. They appreciate quality when they see it, Helen added. And, Sarah, you are quality people. Anyone with half a brain can see that. Sarah looked around the room, at the comfortable furniture and family photos, at Elena's bright eyes and Helen's warm smile, at the evidence of a life built on love and mutual respect rather than fear and power. This was what she had been looking for without knowing it. Not just employment, but a place where her work mattered, where she was valued as a person, where kindness was the default rather than the exception. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. Yes, I would love to meet Dr. Martinez and his wife. And thank you, both of you, for believing in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. Elena clapped her hands together in delight. Wonderful. This calls for celebration. Sarah, would you mind getting the good cookies from the kitchen? The ones I've been saving for special occasions. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the grocery store checkout line, her cart filled with ingredients for Elena's birthday celebration and supplies for the Martinez twins' first birthday party. She had become something she never expected. A small business owner, running Sarah's caring services, providing childcare, elderly companion services, and household management for families who valued competence, kindness, and integrity over submissive silence. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was busier and happier than she had ever been during her time with the Whitmores. Word of mouth in the real world, it turned out, worked very differently than in the rarefied air of Margaret Whitmore's social circle. When Dr. Martinez's wife praised Sarah's gentle competence with premature twins to her pediatrician, when Elena's neighbor saw how Sarah helped her maintain independence and dignity, when Helen mentioned to her nursing colleagues how Sarah had become like family. These genuine references carried weight that Margaret's threats never could. Sarah? Sarah Johnson. The voice made Sarah turn, and she found herself face to face with a woman she recognized but couldn't quite place. Blonde, well-dressed, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested someone accustomed to having others solve her problems. I'm sorry, Sarah said politely. I'm afraid I don't. Jennifer Blackwood, the woman said quickly. We met at the Pemberton Christmas party last year. You were working for the Whitmores then. Sarah's memory clicked into place. Jennifer Blackwood, wife of a hedge fund manager, mother of 3 children who had spent the entire party running wild while their parents socialized, and their nanny chased after them with increasing desperation. Of course, Sarah said carefully. How are you, Mrs. Blackwood? Actually, I've been hoping to run into someone who might know how to reach you, Jennifer said, and Sarah could hear the desperation beneath her polished exterior. I heard through the grapevine that you're working independently now, and I wondered if you might be available for a consultation. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What kind of consultation? Jennifer glanced around the grocery store, then leaned in conspiratorially. Can we speak privately for a moment? Perhaps over coffee? I'll gladly pay for your time. Something in Jennifer's demeanor triggered Sarah's curiosity. This wasn't the casual dismissal she had experienced from Margaret's social circle. This was a woman with a problem who genuinely needed help. I have a few minutes, Sarah said. There's a coffee shop next door. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in the same booth where Sarah had celebrated her liberation from the Whitmore mansion. Jennifer looked exhausted in a way that expensive makeup couldn't hide, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I don't know where else to turn, Jennifer began. My household is falling apart. We've had 6 nannies in 8 months. The children are completely out of control. My husband travels constantly and expects everything to run perfectly when he's home. And she paused, her voice cracking slightly. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Sarah studied the woman across from her. She remembered Jennifer as one of Margaret's friends, someone who had participated in the casual cruelty that passed for conversation in that social circle. But the woman sitting here now looked genuinely broken, stripped of pretense by exhaustion and desperation. Tell me about your children, Sarah said quietly. Tyler is 8, Amanda is 6, and little Michael just turned 4, Jennifer said. Tyler is brilliant, but aggressive, constantly getting in trouble at school for fighting. Amanda is so anxious she won't sleep in her own room anymore. And Michael? Michael hasn't spoken a full sentence since his last nanny quit 3 months ago. Sarah felt her heart squeeze with sympathy despite her reservations. These were children in distress, and children always came first, regardless of their parents' failings. What happened with the nannies? Sarah asked. Jennifer's laugh was hollow and self-deprecating. What didn't happen? The first one quit because Tyler bit her. The second one left because I criticized her cooking. The third one said Amanda was too clingy and refused to comfort her when she had nightmares. The fourth one, she paused, looking ashamed. The fourth one I fired because she suggested that maybe the children's behavior problems stemmed from inconsistent discipline and lack of attention. And she was right, Sarah said gently. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she was right. And instead of listening to her, I got offended and defensive and sent her away. Because that's what people like us do, isn't it? Shoot the messenger instead of hearing the message. The admission surprised Sarah with its honesty. This wasn't the Jennifer Blackwood she remembered from the Christmas party, the one who had laughed at Margaret's cruel jokes and made dismissive comments about the help. What changed? Sarah asked. What made you realize? Michael stopped talking, Jennifer said simply. 3 months ago, right after I fired nanny number 4, Michael just stopped. He used to chatter constantly, asking questions about everything, singing little songs he made up. And then, suddenly, nothing. The pediatrician says there's nothing physically wrong with him, but he won't speak. She wiped her eyes with a tissue that 1 year later, Sarah stood in the grocery store checkout line, her cart filled with ingredients for Elena's birthday celebration and supplies for the Martinez twins' first birthday party. She had become something she never expected. A small business owner, running Sarah's caring services, providing childcare, elderly companion services, and household management for families who valued competence, kindness, and integrity over submissive silence. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was busier and happier than she had ever been during her time with the Whitmores. Word of mouth in the real world, it turned out, worked very differently than in the rarefied air of Margaret Whitmore's social circle. When Dr. Martinez's wife praised Sarah's gentle competence with premature twins to her pediatrician, when Elena's neighbor saw how Sarah helped her maintain independence and dignity, when Helen mentioned to her nursing colleagues how Sarah had become like family. These genuine references carried weight that Margaret's threats never could. Sarah? Sarah Johnson. The voice made Sarah turn, and she found herself face to face with a woman she recognized but couldn't quite place. Blonde, well-dressed, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested someone accustomed to having others solve her problems. I'm sorry, Sarah said politely. I'm afraid I don't, Jennifer Blackwood, the woman said quickly. We met at the Pemberton Christmas party last year. You were working for the Whitmores then. Sarah's memory clicked into place. Jennifer Blackwood, wife of a hedge fund manager, mother of 3 children who had spent the entire party running wild while their parents socialized, and their nanny chased after them with increasing desperation. Of course, Sarah said carefully. How are you, Mrs. Blackwood? Actually, I've been hoping to run into someone who might know how to reach you, Jennifer said, and Sarah could hear the desperation beneath her polished exterior. I heard through the grapevine that you're working independently now, and I wondered if you might be available for a consultation. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What kind of consultation? Jennifer glanced around the grocery store, then leaned in conspiratorially. Can we speak privately for a moment? Perhaps over coffee? I'll gladly pay for your time. Something in Jennifer's demeanor triggered Sarah's curiosity. This wasn't the casual dismissal she had experienced from Margaret's social circle. This was a woman with a problem who genuinely needed help. I have a few minutes, Sarah said. There's a coffee shop next door. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in the same booth where Sarah had celebrated her liberation from the Whitmore mansion. Jennifer looked exhausted in a way that expensive makeup couldn't hide, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I don't know where else to turn, Jennifer began. My household is falling apart. We've had 6 nannies in 8 months. The children are completely out of control. My husband travels constantly and expects everything to run perfectly when he's home. And she paused, her voice cracking slightly. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Sarah studied the woman across from her. She remembered Jennifer as one of Margaret's friends, someone who had participated in the casual cruelty that passed for conversation in that social circle. But the woman sitting here now looked genuinely broken, stripped of pretense by exhaustion and desperation. "Tell me about your children," Sarah said quietly. "Tyler is 8, Amanda is 6, and little Michael just turned 4, Jennifer said. "Tyler is brilliant, but aggressive, constantly getting in trouble at school for fighting. Amanda is so anxious she won't sleep in her own room anymore. And Michael? Michael hasn't spoken a full sentence since his last nanny quit 3 months ago." Sarah felt her heart squeeze with sympathy despite her reservations. These were children in distress, and children always came first, regardless of their parents' failings. "What happened with the nannies?" Sarah asked. Jennifer's laugh was hollow and self-deprecating. "What didn't happen? The first one quit because Tyler bit her. The second one left because I criticized her cooking. The third one said Amanda was too clingy and refused to comfort her when she had nightmares. The fourth one," she paused, looking ashamed. "The fourth one I fired because she suggested that maybe the children's behavior problems stemmed from inconsistent discipline and lack of attention. And she was right," Sarah said gently. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, she was right. And instead of listening to her, I got offended and defensive and sent her away. Because that's what people like us do, isn't it? Shoot the messenger instead of hearing the message." The admission surprised Sarah with its honesty. This wasn't the Jennifer Blackwood she remembered from the Christmas party, the one who had laughed at Margaret's cruel jokes and made dismissive comments about the help. "What changed?" Sarah asked. "What made you realize Michael stopped talking?" Jennifer said simply. 3 months ago, right after I fired nanny number 4, Michael just stopped. He used to chatter constantly, asking questions about everything, singing little songs he made up. And then, suddenly, nothing. The pediatrician says there's nothing physically wrong with him, but he won't speak." She wiped her eyes with a tissue that as Sarah headed to the kitchen, she could hear Elena and Helen chattering excitedly about the possibilities ahead. For the first time in years, the future felt bright with promise rather than shadowed by fear. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that dignity wasn't something you had to earn from others, but something you carried within yourself, no matter where life led you. The good cookies were in the highest cabinet, stored in a tin that had belonged to Elena's mother. As Sarah reached for them, she caught sight of her reflection in the window and was struck by how different she looked. The constant tension was gone from her face, the fear replaced by confidence, the defeat transformed into hope. Margaret Whitmore had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most wrong about this, that some people mattered and others didn't. Everyone mattered. Everyone deserved kindness. And everyone had the power to choose what kind of legacy they wanted to leave in the world. Sarah chose kindness, and it was making all the difference. "Said you might be looking for new employment opportunities?" Sarah's eyebrows rose. Father Morrison was the priest at the church where she volunteered, a kind man who had always treated her with genuine respect and appreciation. "Ah, yes, actually. I just became available today." "Wonderful," Helen said. "I'm looking for someone to help care for my elderly mother. She's 86, still sharp as a tack, but she needs assistance with daily activities. Father Morrison spoke very highly of your character and your capabilities. Would you be interested in discussing the position?" Sarah met Marcus's curious gaze across the table, feeling hope bloom in her chest like a flower after rain. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I would be very interested indeed. Think you can just walk away from your responsibilities? You think there won't be consequences?" Sarah paused at the threshold, looking back at the woman who had made her life miserable for 3 years. But instead of anger or resentment, she felt something unexpected, pity. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "I hope someday you figure out that treating people badly doesn't make you powerful. It just makes you small." And with that, Sarah Johnson walked out of the Whitmore mansion for the last time, her head held high and her dignity intact. Behind her, Margaret's voice rose in one final, futile protest, but Sarah didn't look back. She had finally remembered who she was, and that knowledge was worth more than all the job security in the world. The afternoon sun felt warm on her face as they walked toward Marcus's car, and for the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt truly free, her voice growing stronger with each word. "For both of us." Margaret's laugh was sharp and cutting. "Basic human decency. You work in my home, Sarah." You clean my floors and serve my food and take my money. That's the extent of our relationship. I don't owe you or your family anything beyond your paycheck. And if you don't like those terms, you're welcome to find employment elsewhere. The threat was clear, and they all knew it. Jobs like this were rare, and at Sarah's age, with her limited education and family obligations, finding another position would be nearly impossible. Margaret held all the power, and she knew it. But as Sarah looked at her nephew, at this young man who had faced down enemies in foreign lands, who had returned home expecting to find the freedom and dignity he had fought to preserve, she realized that some things were worth more than security. Some lines, once crossed, changed everything that came after. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with possibilities, heavy with years of unspoken truths finally demanding to be heard. In the crystal chandelier above, light fractured into 1,000 rainbow fragments, each one catching something different, revealing hidden facets of what had seemed like simple, transparent reality. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her bones like cold. Whatever happened next would change everything. And, for the first time in 3 years, that thought didn't terrify her. It felt like freedom.